All right, excellent. So I thought today we would be able to hammer our way through 1 Kings 9, 10, 11. Um, I'm skipping ahead a couple of chapters, both for time purposes and because the couple of chapters I'm skipping have just more details about what goes into the temple and what goes into the palace. Especially chapter 8 is mostly about palace furnishings, which, if anyone plans a future career as an interior decorator for a palace, I suppose is useful. But, but otherwise, I think it's probably a little arcane at this point. However, so in chapter 8, just to summarize real quick, everything gets finished, and the temple is dedicated when they bring the ark into it, and then Solomon gives a prayer, which is basically a dedication speech in the form of a prayer, which is quite lengthy and very good, and definitely worth going back and reading if you don't know it. It's you can see how he managed to write 5,000 proverbs and 3,500 songs or whatever it is he came up with, because he definitely doesn't run out of words, and he's got some good thoughts in there. So beginning in chapter 9, then God basically answers him back, responds to him, right? For the second time in Solomon's life, or second time anyway, since he becomes king, God talks to him directly. And I don't think it mentions that it's in a dream. I'll look here a second, but I think that's the implication, like it was the first time. So let me get going here to 1 Kings 9. I'll go like that. And no, I don't go like that. I don't go like that at all. That's wrong. All right. Share. And then that. What are you guys seeing?
We're seeing Zoom.
Zoom.
Okay, that didn't work at all. Stop share. Share screen. Oh, here we go. Then I go like that. And then I hit share. 1 Kings 9 now?
Lord appears to Solomon. Yes.
Yay! That's where we want him. All right. Right where we want him. Lord appears to Solomon, 1 Kings 9. So Solomon finished building the temple of the Lord and the royal palace, and he achieved all he desired to do. It took him about 20 years. Well, it took him 13 years. Well, no, actually 25 years for both, and a lot of laborers, and a whole lot of gold and wood. The Lord appeared to him a second time, as he had appeared to him in Gibeon, henceforth probably in a dream. The Lord said to him, I have heard the prayer and plea you have made before me. I have consecrated this temple which you have built by putting my name there forever, putting myself there. My eyes and my heart will always be there. As for you, if you walk before me faithfully with integrity of heart and uprightness, as David your father did most of the time, and do all I command and observe my decrees and laws, I will establish your royal throne over Israel forever, as I promised David your father when I said, you shall never fail to have a successor on the throne of Israel. I always think it's cool that it doesn't say son. In one translation, I read it says man. It says you'll always have a man on the throne of Israel. This translation says successor, but it's careful not to say son. But if you or your descendants turn away from me and do not observe the commands and decrees I have given you, and go off and serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel from the land I have given them and will reject this temple I have consecrated for my name. Israel will then become a byword and an object of ridicule among all peoples. This temple will become a heap of rubble. All who pass by will be appalled and will scoff and say, why has the Lord done such a thing to this land, to this temple? And other people, presumably, will answer, because they have forsaken the Lord their God, who brought their ancestors out of Egypt, and have embraced other gods, worshiping and serving them. That is why the Lord brought all this disaster on them. Well, the Lord is a jealous God, Yahweh is. And so now, is the first time in 1 Kings, I think in the next chapter, we finally get some special guest star appearances from other Canaanite deities popping their heads in here. All right. So Solomon gets done building. What else did he do? At the end of 20 years, he built these two buildings. King Solomon gave 20 towns in Galilee to Hiram, king of Tyre. Remember, that's the guy he had the trade agreement with. to get all that good cedar wood out of Lebanon. And you know that's good cedar wood because I think to this day they have don't they have a cedar tree on their flag, the Lebanese
Yes.
flag? Yeah. And all the cedar and juniper and gold he wanted. But when Hiram went from Tyre to see the towns that Solomon had given him, he was not pleased with them. What kind of towns are these you've given me, my brother? And he called them the land of Kabul, which they have that name to this day, whatever that day was. I looked it up. It means basically worthless land or worthless towns. Right. Now Hiram has sent the king 100. Now Hiram had sent the king 120 talents of gold, which again I looked that up. It's like 4.5 tons. It's a lot of gold. It's a lot of gold, and presumably he wanted more than 20 dusty towns for it in the end. It never says that he got anything better than that in the deal. However, it can be presumed as we read later that he might have gotten a little gold back in the deal later. So in verse 15. Here is the account of the forced labor King Solomon conscripted to build the Lord's temple, his own palace, the terraces, the wall of Jerusalem, which is just as famous, and Hazar, Megiddo, and Gezer. Parenthetical. Pharaoh, king of Egypt, had attacked and captured Gezer. He had set it on fire. He killed its Canaanite inhabitants and then gave it as a wedding present to his daughter, Solomon's wife. Remember, Solomon married the Pharaoh's daughter earlier on as kind of a political agreement. So Solomon rebuilt Gezer. He built up the lower Beth Horon, Baalath, and Tadmor in the desert within his land, as well as all his store cities and the towns for his chariots and for his horses. Whatever he desired to build in Jerusalem, in Lebanon, and throughout all the territory he ruled. So, he was a builder. He was building it all up. Now, there's some people left from the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites. Those party animals that were supposed to have been eliminated and totally destroyed, given over to God, totally destroyed back when Joshua came into the picture. But there's a scattering of them left. Solomon conscripted the descendants of all these people remaining in the land. That does not sound like he offered invitations, because conscripted means putting them to work, forced labor, service slave labor, as it is to this day, which I think is interesting. But Solomon did not make slaves of any of the Israelites. They were his fighting men, his government officials, his officers, his captains, and they were in charge, the commanders of his chariots and charioteers. They were also the chief officials in charge of Solomon's projects, 550 officials supervising those who did the work. So Solomon he conscripted those who had been conquered but had not been destroyed in the land. Right? And it sounds like it's slavery for life. It doesn't sound like it was slavery for getting these projects done. But I could be wrong about that. It's still not chattel slavery, of course. It's still not like the unique form of slavery that was practiced in North America. After Pharaoh's daughter had come up from the city of David to the palace Solomon had built for her, he consecrated the terraces. 3 times a year, Solomon sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings on the altar he had built for the Lord, burning incense before the Lord along with them, and so fulfilled the temple obligations. Those of you who are good with your temple obligations, what 3 times a year would he be sacrificing? Pastor Monty, what 3 times a year? What would
Christmas, Easter, and Epiphany, I guess.
No, that's when people show up at church.
Yeah, those are the 3 high days in our calendar.
I think it would be it'd be Passover, right? It'd be the festival.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
Festival of Weeks, I think it was called, and what was the other one? Was the one that was just called Tabernacles or something?
Well, yeah.
Tabernacles?
Historically, there were 3 festivals. One of them was Passover, one of them was the Tabernacles, and one of them was the Festival of Booths. Shavuot. The high holidays that we know now in Jewish tradition probably didn't exist at that time.
Yeah.
So there were three big festivals, and it was obligatory at Jesus' time that just like Muslims make the pilgrimage to Mecca, it was obligatory for anybody who could to attend those three festivals in Jerusalem.
Yeah. Yeah. Indeed. Thank you. So Solomon, he was there. He 3 times a year he did what he was supposed to do. He also did a lot he wasn't supposed to do, but we get to chapter 10 in a second. King Solomon built ships at Ezion Geber, which is in Edom, on the shores of the Red Sea. And good old King Hiram, he sent his men, they were good sailors, to serve in the fleet with Solomon's men. They sailed to Ophir, and brought back 420 talents of gold. That's a lot of gold, which they delivered to King Solomon. Now, the text notes that I read, they conjecture that perhaps Hiram got paid back in this way, right? During these trips, there was enough gold that Hiram got paid back through them.
I'm sorry, Kevin, could you say that again?
There's conjecture in the text notes that I read that this is how Hiram, that he got more than his 20 towns he didn't like. He got that these through this basically trade, right? Through ship trade, through sea trade, they acquired gold in order to pay him back. There's also interesting conjecture about where Ophir, Ophir, is. Right? There's a later note that these journeys took about 2 years round trip, which means it's probably not around Arabia. That'd be too long for it to take. It's too close for it to take that long. So a couple of conjectures I read is it could have been as far away as India or down to Zimbabwe, or perhaps the Somalia or somewhere around the North African coast. But wherever it is, like they were making themselves through their allies along the shore. Solomon had like a seagoing trade operation going as well as a caravan land trade. So Solomon was pretty good at enriching himself and his country through all this building. All right, I'm going to move on to 10 because in 10 Solomon starts tripping up.
Right. Again, I think it's interesting that the Solomon's Navy, if you want to call it that, was centered on not on the Mediterranean, where they didn't have control of most of those ports, but in the what now we call the Gulf of Sinai, Eilat, and so the trade was directed not so much to the Mediterranean world as to places like Oman, Yemen, the Horn of Africa, and possibly India.
Yeah, Yemen, in fact, is probably where Sheba is. Right?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
Two main candidates for Sheba. Yemen is one, and Ethiopia is the other.
Yeah. So speaking of Sheba, I think we're about to get a special guest star appearance from their queen. No, that's wrong. I closed that one. Stop share. Okay, that's good. Good that stopped. And then I can play with this. You would think like someday I'm going to get this down and it's all going to run smoothly. But
once you get it down, the next day they'll come up with a vaccine.
Yeah.
So please, quick, get it down soon.
Yeah. Well, that brings up an interesting question. I'm willing to take, I teach middle school in the Archdiocese. And
what's likely to happen is Zoom will come out with a new release and everything will be different from what we've learned.
Yeah.
That's right.
Indeed. So I'm willing to take bets on whether or not I'm actually going to see the inside of a classroom this fall. Well, on time anyway. Right now, I would say that I'm 51% sure that we're going to be in the classroom, but I think this is a real close call. I think it's a toss-up, honestly.
I suspect you aren't.
Yeah, if I was a betting man, which I am,
They're
I
going
would-
to do
I
a
would equate
hybrid
them to
here
this.
in Evanston where you,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, well.
I know the CP, like the teachers union, doesn't want to open Chicago public schools.
Yeah.
And the archdiocese has pretty much followed their lead since the beginning of this back in March. So we shall see. All right, you guys seeing chapter 10 up?
Yeah.
Excellent. All right, Queen of Sheba comes to town. When the Queen of Sheba heard about the famous Solomon and his relationship to the Lord, she's familiar with, because she would think of the Lord, as the national God of Israel. They all got their own gods, so she's familiar with him. She came to test Solomon with hard questions. Arriving at Jerusalem with a very great caravan, she had an entourage, camels carrying spices, large quantities of gold, precious stones. She came to Solomon and talked to him about all that she had on her mind. Solomon answered all her questions. Nothing was too hard for the king to explain to her. When the Queen of Sheba saw all the wisdom of Solomon and the palace he had built, the food on his table, the seating of his officials, the attending servants in their robes, his cupbearers, the burnt offerings he made at the temple Lord, she was overwhelmed. Now, he did it with style. He had some elegance, right? She was impressed by the grandeur, by the elegance. The line that strikes me, the seating of his officials. So there's probably something like courtly, the whole thing too, that was impressive. So she said to the king, "The report I heard in my own country about your achievements and your wisdom is true, but I did not believe these things until I came and saw with my own eyes. Indeed, not even half was told me, and wisdom and wealth far exceeded the report I had heard. How happy your people must be. How happy your officials who continually stand for you and hear your wisdom. Praise be to the Lord your God, who has delighted in you and placed you on the throne of Israel. Because of the Lord's eternal love for Israel, he has made you king to maintain justice and righteousness." Of the people in this Zoom, I suppose that Pastor Monty is the only one who regularly hears people say to him, "How happy your people must be to stand in front of you and hear your wisdom."
All of it.
Very good.
And she gave the king 120 talents of gold, which now he's like, let's see, he's up to 500 or 600 talents of gold by this point, large quantities of spices and precious stones. Never again were so many spices brought in all those in those times as Queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. So someone's gonna need to invent the cedar tree spice rack for King Solomon. Now another parenthetical. So some other prophet decided to slip this in at some point. Hiram's ships brought gold from Ophir and from there they brought great cargoes of almug wood, which is not the same apparently as all gum wood. Both words appear in these verses, just switching around the G and the M. So I'm not sure if that's actually wrong, but you'll see that all gum wood is also in First Kings. Anyway, and precious stones. The king used the almug wood to make supports for the temple of the Lord and for the royal palace, and to make harps and lyres for the musicians. So much almug wood has never been imported or seen since that day. It was nice of the later person to put that in to repeat the style of the verse right before then. Makes it fit in nicely. King Solomon gave the Queen of Sheba all she desired and asked for, beside what he had given her out of his royal bounty. Then she left and returned with her retinue, great word, to her own country. So she and all her entourage pack up and go. And thus the Queen of Sheba, who gets famous basically as more of an expression than anything else, sort of like the someone impressed by grandeur, right? Someone who likes money. But that's pretty much it for her. So more about his splendor. Weight of the gold Solomon received yearly was 666 talents, ironically, not including the revenues from merchants and traders and from all the Arabian kings and governors of their territory. So the other kings giving him tribute as well. That's how far they've spread. King Solomon made 200 large shields of hammered gold. 600 shekels of gold went into each shield. He also made 300 small shields of hammered gold, with 3 minas of gold in each shield. The king put them in the palace of the forest of Lebanon. So he's got all these shields. He's got golden shields. not really practical, but very good looking. Then the king made a great throne covered with ivory and overlaid with fine gold. The throne had 6 steps, and its back had a rounded top. On both sides of the seat were armrests, with a lion standing beside each of them. So there's the lion. All right. 12 lions stood on the 6 steps. Blah blah blah. He's got more gold. He's got a lot more wood, pure gold. I like this. And halfway through 21, nothing was made of silver, because silver was considered of little value in Solomon's days. And really, it takes the English to make silver valuable. The king had a fleet of trading ships to sea along with the ships of Hiram. Once every 3 years, it returned. Oh, here we go. So it's a long journey, carrying gold, silver, and ivory. And Michael Jackson, building a private zoo, would love this. Apes and baboons as well. All right. So it's great. You got wood, you get gold, you get spices, you get apes and baboons thrown into the bargain. And that's fantastic. I don't know what you would do with your apes and baboons. I would play with mine all the time.
My Bible has an alternative translation there. It's peacocks.
Peacocks, really?
They can't tell whether the word means baboons or peacocks.
I hope it's both. Honestly. I hope his baboons played with the peacocks. Solomon accumulated chariots and horses. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horses. So it's a lot of horses, which he kept in the chariot cities, and also with him in Jerusalem. King made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones, because it didn't mean anything. They didn't like silver. And cedar as plentiful as sycamore fig, trees in the foothills. Solomon's horses were imported from Egypt and from Q. The royal merchants purchased them from, I'm going to go with Q, at the current price. They imported a chariot from Egypt for 600 shekels of silver and a horse for 150. They also exported them to all the kings of the Hittites and the Arameans. I suppose this means that even though the Egyptians had been using chariots for a long time, remember it was the chariots pursuing them out of Egypt in the first place.
Yeah.
It seems like the Israelites were not used to using chariots as weapons of war until at least Solomon's time or after, if they're just now importing all of them. Yeah. There must have been a ground army exclusively. All right. How y'all doing? Hello again.
Well, chariots take a fair amount of technology to build.
Yeah.
That's not an easy thing. They're
And a lot of horses too. I assuming that it would, what those numbers mean. I was assuming is it takes 4 horses per chariot, maybe 6 per chariot.
probably not that many from what I've seen of chariot things, but it depends on whether or not it's a heavy chariot or a light chariot.
Right.
Different countries use different types. I think the Hittites, if I remember correctly, used fairly heavy ones, and the Egyptians used light. Or maybe I have that exactly backwards. But,
I think you're right, Ken.
Mhm.
There's one interesting note here on the various peoples that are being mentioned.
Yeah.
You see, Hittites keep coming up.
Mhm.
And this is obviously written by somebody in the 6th century who had no idea of the history of the Hittites. Because by the time Solomon is on the scene, the Hittite Empire is gone.
yeah.
And so he wouldn't have had any Hittite slaves.
Yeah, there's actually a text note and I can't remember which verse it's for. I read through it yesterday, that mentions that, and their argument was the Hittite was being used interchangeably as a general name for a
Yeah.
Canaanite,
Somebody from the north is called a Hittite,
right.
even though it has nothing to do with the historic Hittite Empire.
Yeah, the text note also mentioned, you're right, that the Hittite Empire was gone by then.
Yeah.
Right. But God's still hanging around. Okay, 1 second here. We're flying through today, folks. I knew it was possible. All you got to get me to do is not digress as much as I usually do.
They didn't need an Arabian horse, I guess.
All right, stop.
Marianne, are you trying to?
Oh, should I just check?
No, don't hear. I can hear you.
I said, I wondered how long ago Arabian horses came into being, because they're known for so many things nowadays. Did they go back that far?
I don't know. I don't know my horse history.
I don't know.
A few weeks ago, when Monty was looking at the difference between donkeys and mules, horses as well. I'm a city boy. Last time I was on a horse was like when I was being led around in a circle by a carny. All right, let's see if it appears now. Why doesn't it appear when I want it to appear? It's the last thing I needed to do. Second to last thing. Do that and go like that, and then go like this. Desktop 1.
Oh, looks like Kevin dropped out. Now he's coming back.
Uh-oh.
Hey, welcome back.
I say that share button and that leave button are dangerously close together. So. All right. I'm gonna put that up. I'm gonna try this again. That can be minimized. Share screen. Host to say. Oh, you have to re-enable my sheen.
Oh, okay. Sorry, will do. Okay.
You should see me juggling. I run the Quiz Bowl team at our school, or Scholastic Bowl, sometimes called. And when we went to e-learning, we still had practice via Zoom, where I had to run 3 different screens. One was the Zoom, one was the questions, which couldn't be downloaded because there's top secret, right? So I could only do it off a screen. I couldn't print them out. And the third was this buzzer app that allows them to hit a button on their computer, and I can see who rings in, and it freezes everyone else out. But I had to keep toggling between all these screens. It was not good. It was not good at all. All right.
You need more monitors.
All right. Screen sharing, and then 11. Okay. Excellent. Okay. Here's where Solomon starts. Solomon's wives. All right. Now, one's enough for me, but not for Solomon. Solomon, however, loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter. He got himself some Moabites, some Ammonites, some Edomites, some Sidonians, and here are our Hittites again. They were from nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, "You must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods." Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. He was a ladies' man. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, and his wives led him astray. Well, I mean, you can imagine. You know, if you're going to be the Wilt Chamberlain of the Near East, it's going to fall into problems there. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been, mostly. He followed Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Moloch, the detestable god of the Ammonites. There's a couple of deities that are very close to Ashtoreth. And the other one, whose name I'm forgetting right now, it shouldn't be confused because she's also mentioned. One is like this Ashtoreth is more of a fertility god, and the other one was more like a mother god. They're similar and somewhat overlapping, but definitely different. Anyway, so Solomon did evil in the eyes of the Lord, did not follow the Lord completely as David his father had done. On a hill east of Jerusalem, in one of the high places, of course, Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab, for Moloch, the detestable god of the Ammonites. Now these guys, they're already famous, right? In the book of Numbers, Moses talks about the Moabites as being the children of Chemosh, or the people of Chemosh. right? And he did the same for all his foreign wives who burned incense and offered sacrifices to their gods. Chemosh and Moloch, and Moloch goes by several different spellings. It's actually spelled differently in the Bible that I have next to me than it is on the screen here. They're nasty peoples, right? Moloch especially. Chemosh, like they're detestable here because of the child sacrifices. I think we talked about that before. Chemosh didn't get that many child sacrifices. It wasn't a normal thing, right? But in times of like need, they would toss in a kid just to be on the safe side. Moloch, on the other hand, according to later rabbinical tradition, Moloch's child sacrifice was more common. And I think I have a picture here of you guys see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, so that's supposedly Moloch. All right,
According to that as the devil.
Yeah.
according to like a later rabbinical tradition that describes it in detail. All right, so what you got here is you got seven. You see those seven like chambers basically in his chest.
Mhm.
Right? So he's supposed to be hollow on the inside, right? And each of these chambers is filled with a different thing. Some of them are like flour, turtle doves in one of them, various an ox, a lamb, and then in one of the chambers, I'm imagining probably at the top, you get your human there too. Then the fire is stoked from the bottom there in that archway-shaped hole, and I would guess the smoke would come out of the nostrils, which would be quite a visual treat, I suppose. And it's supposedly made of bronze, and it's burned wood on the inside. He is a nasty-looking character, and I don't know what your national deity would look like if you got to design one, but if I wanted to make one to look super scary, I don't think you could go wrong with using him as an example. So where was I here? Okay. I couldn't find a picture of Chemosh, just words about him, unfortunately. The Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. Frankly, if God appears to me one time, I think I'm going to remember it for the rest of my life. On that. But apparently twice wasn't good enough for him. But like in fairness, he's got 700. Oh, he's got what? 400 plus 3. He's got 700 women, in his ears all the time. Although he had forbidden Solomon to follow other gods, Solomon did not keep the Lord's command. So the Lord said to Solomon, "Since this is your attitude, and you have not kept my covenant and my decrees, which I commanded you, all of 2 chapters ago, I will certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates. Nevertheless, for the sake of David, your father, I will not do it during your lifetime. I will tear it out of the hand of your son. And I will not tear the whole kingdom from him, but will give him one tribe for the sake of David, my servant, and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen." So, I mean, he actually gets 2 tribes out of it, right? He gets Judah and Simeon, right? But the land's basically called Judah. I think that Simeon is kind of dissolved into Judah. So Solomon's got adversaries written up now. This is kind of cool. I like this. So the Lord raised up against Solomon an adversary, Hadad, the Edomite, good old Edom, over there, from the royal line of Edom. Earlier, when David was fighting with Edom, Joab, the commander of the army, remember him in the beginning? The guy who grabbed the horns and then didn't make any difference? Got killed anyway? Joab, the commander of the army, had gone up to bury the dead and struck down all the men in Edom. Joab and all the Israelites stayed there for 6 months until they destroyed all the men in Edom. But Hadad, still only a boy, fled to Egypt with some Edomite officials who had served his father. Boy, people are always fleeing in and out of Egypt. They're coming and going. They're fleeing. They set out from Midian and went to Paran. Then, taking people from Paran with them, they went to Egypt, to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, who gave Hadad a house and land that provided him with food. Pharaoh liked him. He also gave him a sister of his own, Queen Tahpenes, in marriage, or Tahpenes. The sister of Tahpenes bore him a son named Genevieve, whom Tahpenes brought up in the royal palace. There Genubath lived with Pharaoh's own children. While he was in Egypt, Hadad heard that David rested with his ancestors, and that Joab the commander was also dead. Then Hadad said to Pharaoh, "Let me go, that I may return to my own country." "What have you lacked here that you want to go back to your own country?" Pharaoh asked. "Nothing, but do let me go." So there's one enemy. It's going to be a pain in the butt. All right. And I think it's this the exchange with Pharaoh is interesting as well, because I don't think it's because I could be wrong. It could be because Pharaoh really liked this guy and wants him around, but he knows he's going to stir up trouble. And Pharaoh has an agreement with Solomon. All right. So he doesn't need this guy making trouble, but he lets him go anyway.
I think
And
it's.
God, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think it's also interesting that what you have here is an anti-Moses story. In the sense
Yes,
that
yeah, the reverse.
this is almost exactly the same story as Moses, except it's told about an Edomite.
Mhm.
And so, it's probably an old tradition that got incorporated into this book.
Mhm.
But it's also interesting, I think Edom probably was under the control of Egypt at that point.
Hmm.
Egypt kept considering this whole area to be really part of their territory.
Mhm.
And so Solomon was an exception to that, but Edom was not.
Yeah, you could see how Egypt would think that too.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems clear that they are the power that can put their thumb on it when they decide they want to or need to. It just feels that way anyway. So he's got that one adversary. He also raised up against Solomon another one in verse 23, Rezon, son of Eliada, who had fled from his master, Hadadezer, king of Zobah. Don't ask me where that was. When David destroyed Zobah's army, Rezon gathered a band of men around him and became their leader. They went to Damascus, okay, where they settled and took control. Damascus is always a hotbed of rebellion. I think basically it was subdued for like a second. Rezon was Israel's adversary as long as Solomon lived, adding to the trouble caused by Hadad. So Rezon ruled in Aram up there and was hostile towards Israel. So Solomon has a couple of people near the end of his days who are being trouble. Here's another one. All right. Also, Jeroboam, son of Nebat, rebelled against the king. He was one of Solomon's officials. He's an Ephraimite, so that was one of the half tribes that came from Joseph's line, right? Manasseh and Ephraim, if I'm correct. And his mother was a widow named Zeruiah. Here's account of what he did. Solomon had built the terraces and had filled in the gap in the wall of the city of David, his father. Now Jeroboam was a man of standing. When Solomon saw how well he did, he put him in charge of the whole labor force of the tribes of Joseph. So his own tribe, as well as the half-tribe Manasseh, that was on that side of the Jordan. About that time, Jeroboam was going out of Jerusalem, and Ahijah, the prophet of Shiloh, met him, prophet from Shiloh, I think, met him on the way wearing a new cloak. The two of them were alone out in the country. And Ahijah took hold of his new cloak and tore it into 12 pieces. Then he said to Jeroboam, "Take 10 pieces for yourself. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. See, I'm going to tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hand and give you 10 tribes. For the sake of my servant David and the city of Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, he will have one tribe. I will do this because they have forsaken me and worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Shamash, the god of the Moabites, Moloch, the god of the Ammonites, and have not walked in obedience to me, nor done what is right in my eyes, nor kept my decrees and laws as David, Solomon's father, did. But I will not take the whole kingdom out of Solomon's hand. I have made him ruler all the days of his life for the sake of David my servant, whom I chose and who obeyed my commands and decrees. I will take the kingdom from his son's hands and give you 10 tribes. I will give one tribe to his son, to David my servant, and may always have a lamp before me in Jerusalem, the city where I choose to put my name." Jerusalem's important to God. "However, as for you, I will take you, and you will rule over all your heart desires. You will be king over Israel. If you do whatever I command you to, and walk in obedience to me, and do what is right in my eyes by obeying my decrees and commands, as David my servant did most of the time, I will be with you. I will build you a dynasty as enduring as the one I built for David and will give Israel to you. I will humble David's descendants because of this, but not forever. Only a 10-1 odds that Jeroboam does not walk in God's commands all his life. Solomon tried to kill Jeroboam. How this all got back to him? I guess I guess the assumption is that Jeroboam tried to start the rebellion before Solomon died. Tried to like jump on it first, because Solomon tried to kill Jeroboam, but Jeroboam fled to Egypt, to Shishak the king. I think it's the first pharaoh mentioned by name, and stayed there until Solomon's death, which is conveniently the next verse. As for the other events of Solomon's reign, all he did and the wisdom he displayed, are they not written in the book of the Annals of Solomon? A rhetorical question that pops up after every king the rest of the way in the book of Kings. Are they not written there? What are you asking me for? Solomon reigned in Jerusalem, over all Israel, 40 years. Then he rested with his ancestors and was buried in the city of David, his father. And Rehoboam, his son, succeeded him as king. So we get to the Jeroboam and Rehoboam. So we all have a pretty good idea of what's the big event that's coming next. All right. We're gonna split. We're gonna split into north and the south, into 10 and 2, or 10 and 1. I think of it pretty soon here. Pretty exciting stuff, hey guys. So we've made it through Solomon. Solomon is now resting with his fathers.
I think the passage that you started with, Kevin, one way to look at it is that there are bookends in this whole collection of books from, well, certainly the book of Kings, First and Second Kings. Have the one bookend is the description of God's response to Solomon's dedication of the temple, in which you're going to have the kingdom, you're going to have the temple, you're going to have the city of Jerusalem forever. But the other bookend is at the end of Kings, which says it's all gone. It's all been destroyed. And so the in between then you have all the books of the library, so to speak, between the bookends.
Right. You have bookends with Solomon and Josiah as well, and you have like lots of different kinds of symmetry. Books. Symmetry within symmetry. Like they did a good job, those old prophets, of putting it all together. I enjoyed it. And I would recommend, if you want to kill off an afternoon the way I did yesterday, falling down a Wikipedia rabbit hole, look up Canaanite deities. It's a really fun way to kill an afternoon. There's a lot of them. There sure are a lot of them. And they kind of they cross over borders, change names, have basically a lot of the same functions. And you read how Yahweh, incorporated El, and all this. It's pretty fascinating stuff, honestly. How the Egyptian ones are inspiration, but slightly different. How some of the Egyptian gods were influenced in their understanding when the Levantine gods came down. It's fun stuff. A lot of writings outside of the Hebrew writings that shed more light on the practices of worship of these deities, which are really interesting. How the ancient world, how the late Bronze Age, early Iron Age world worked with their deities. It's good stuff. On a rainy day, if it rains later, jump on Wikipedia. Trust me, Canaanite deities, can't go wrong. Other than that, I don't have anything else for right now. Anyone have anything they want to add? Talk about jokes?
It's so hard to remember. There's a lot of things in the Bible that I've been reading a book about Finland,
Mm-hmm.
and those names are very difficult too. And vowels, so forth. Anyway, that's enough of that.
Indeed, my friend Annalise, who's half Swedish on both sides, and therefore decided she's full Swedish, decided to learn Swedish during the pandemic, during on one of the apps that you can learn languages for. She said she was doing fine up until she got to the possessives, and then things started to fall apart. Plus, I don't know who she's going to practice on. I don't know who speaks Swedish.
Daughter's been taking Italian at some school in Boston for
Mhm.
the last 3 or 4 years. So, and she loves that language. So, and she loves Italy.
Excellent. I've always considered it a source of great shame in my life that I don't speak a second language. It can be argued I don't really speak a first one. I took a couple years of Spanish in both high school and college, and I remember cerveza and baño.
Those are important.
Here,
So important.
I figure that's all I'd ever need.
One
Beyond
to
that,
follow
I'm-
the other.
So I think 2 more weeks and we should be able to work our way through First Kings. I'm really looking forward to getting the rest of these kings down and seeing how they fail to keep up the covenant again and again and again, one worse than the next. All right. So more bad news ahead of us, and I'm looking forward to it.
Poor God. Yeah.
No, don't worry. He's going to appear in a whisper. I like it when that happens. We'll
Yeah.
I have to share with you one story before we go. This is one of these stories that kids bring home from Sunday school. And so the mother asks the kid, "What did you learn today?" And the kid said, "Well, we learned about King Solomon. He had 900 wives and 300 porcupines."
Porcupines were made for a more comfortable existence. That's very good. I like that a lot. All right, guys. Well, you have a great week.
All right. Thank you.
Take
Thanks,
care.
Kevin.
All right. Thanks all. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.